This is the Fifth Estate winning headlines, your media police post. Brought to you by the Fort Hall School of Government, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. But we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 15th of March 2020, and I am 2J.
I'm Tom.
And I am DM. In case you missed the headlines, here they are. The Daily Nation. Alarm bells as virus spreads to counties. The Standard. RUTO allies face axe. And finally, The Star. Senators want rent, loans frozen due to COVID-19.
Yes.
Let's start with a political hot topic. So the Standard is telling us that a close ally of the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, David Murathe, has promised a shake-up in the leadership in parliament. And he's targeting what he's calling the saboteurs of the president's intention. And that is Aden Duale and Murkomen. He's also accusing RUTO of mobilizing MPs to protest against the reconstitution of the Jubilee Party, and they're protesting against the political parties.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I think this business of fighting or trying to unseat RUTO through the political parties is actually futile for two reasons. One, the Constitution takes precedence over any lesser laws. Some members of parliament are quoting the Political Parties Act as a route to unseat the deputy president. The Constitution is very clear in Article 150 for the grounds of why, or it tells us the why the deputy president can be removed. And Article 144 and 145 tells us the how. And in the why, nowhere does it say that if he's political partyless suddenly, then
he loses his
spot. The second reason is this. Jubilee is dead. It's actually just awaiting burial. It is dead. And we can draw from history. Even before we go to history, this is the prediction. This is the future. RUTO is definitely going to leave Jubilee before 2022. The President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga will probably constitute a sort of coalition that is formed or that is based on the BBI. So there is no Jubilee to talk about anyway as you scheme. And secondly, we learned from history, no coalitions that have been constituted after a decisive elections last. In fact, JP has lasted quite a bit, 3 years. 2013, CORD died after. 2017, NASA died after. So people are flogging a dead horse.
You know, DM, here I see a game of irritation. You see, William Ruto stands to give a statement and repeats everything Uhuru and Mutahi Kagwe has said, number one. Number two, goes to Twitter and then says, we as an executive have asked Parliament, we as an executive. Weeks later, after Uhuru Kenyatta has made a statement, then he says, oh, I have had complaints from Kilifi, their policemen who have tortured, who have mistreated civilians, and I have asked the IG to do some, some action. What he's doing here is playing, me too. When you're young, your siblings would irritate you by saying, Ata mimi, me too, me too. He's doing that to irritate Uhuru Kenyatta.
And to stay relevant.
And to stay relevant, yes. And in turn, Uhuru Kenyatta's spokesman now, who is David Murathe, is doing the same by issuing out threats, as like a prefect. And what he's doing is, we have for a long time argued that Uhuru Kenyatta needs a Rasputin, someone who is vile and
he's finding that in Murathe.
And he's finding that in Murathe. And Murathe then takes all of that. He becomes a kichungi for Uhuru Kenyatta, all of that. The point is this. It is true, yes, the party cannot be a mechanism to impeach William Ruto. They know that. The end game here is irritation. They just want to irritate him and disturb him and distract him from what could be happening in the back scenes.
What do you think about the headline itself? We have a 3-part criteria that we use to analyze the headlines for you. We ask, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And finally, is it thoughtful or lazy?
So it has come to our attention, though, that we are not following our own criteria. Some of the people who comment on our YouTube are saying that we are being quite flippant with our decisions. So today, I think we should follow
Criteria.
The criteria strictly.
To the T.
Yes.
Okay, so we will park that one. What is the Daily Nation telling us?
Daily Nation tells us alarm bells as virus spreads to counties. Now they say Nairobi has reached 100, the coronavirus infections in Nairobi have reached 101.
Yes.
Mombasa is 34, in Kilifi 10, in Kiambu 7, Mandera 6, Machako 6, and Nakuru 5. Now there's also a pointer there that if you are not wearing a mask from today and you appear in public, then you shall be arrested by the cops. And I think that's it's a good thing, because I think part of the part of how the virus spreads itself is through mouth. And
but the question I want to ask, and I had seen this being brought up in other countries, where the police are arresting people who are in public surface vehicles who are not wearing masks. And the question was asked, instead of arresting people, why not just provide them with a mask instead? You know,
you see,
because you're assuming that everybody has the funds accessible to purchase a mask.
Let me tell
the
you.
government did say that with the manufacturers they're engaging with, that a mask should not cost more than 20 shillings. We all know that was dead on arrival, because I've seen masks that are, I think the base price right now is about 100 shillings.
The way you control Africans is through fear. If you give them masks, they use them as handkerchiefs.
All right.
And you've also seen people being very innovative and using other things as masks, particularly in Muranga.
In Muranga.
So that was the Daily Nation. The Star.
Oh dear.
The Star is telling us that senators want rent loans frozen during COVID-19. So this is a proposal that's before the Senate right now, the Pandemic Response Management Bill. And so here they want to come up with measures to cushion Kenyans against the health and economic effects of a pandemic in general. At the moment, yes, it's targeting corona, but this is just in general pandemic sense. So with the approval of Parliament, who is quite honestly missing right now from this entire discussion, they want to introduce tax measures to cushion the effects of people during this period. So they talk about loans, trade licenses, land rates, loans that you might have with the with banks, landlords, tenants. I think this is fantastic, because I think this is one thing that Kenyans have actually been waiting for. If you're told to stay at home, you cannot engage in business, you cannot buy food, you cannot pay your rent. So finally the government is catching up with
some relief.
The real worries that people have. My only question is, how do they determine which Kenyans have been hit hard?
It's indeed the work of Parliament to actually make these laws. The Senate is the lower house, for goodness sake. I think they just want to remain relevant and to seem like they're doing something.
But isn't this is a fantastic bill?
I mean, it is, but I mean, I doubt it will see the light of day.
All right.
The headline itself is fantastic. I think it's very topical, and I think they were very thoughtful in the way that they crafted it, because they highlighted the things that are actually important to us. These are the things that we want to know about rent, want to know about the position of the government in terms of loans. So do we have a consensus that the Star gives us our winning headline today?
What is the criteria?
It is very topical. It is groundbreaking. And I think it's extremely thoughtful.
3 ticks.
You guys can have it. I really don't agree with it.
So the Star gives us our winning headline. And on to the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. And just like the headlines, we have a 3-part criteria that we use to analyze them for you. We ask, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And finally, is the cartoon effective, or is it just plain lazy?
The Nation, you have Ndula, and there you have caricature of Uhuru Kenyatta. And next to him is caricature of William Ruto, who seems to be sinking. And there is a jack plane, and the head of the jack plane is Francis Atwoli, and you have a chisel with the face of David Murade. And Uhuru is holding a tape measure to William Ruto, and Ruto is saying, I lay blame on all these tools.
On the tools. In fact, I think Ruto is not sinking. It's his legs have been cut.
He's been cut down to size.
He's been cut to size. This is a very smart cartoon, because even the tools that Ndula has selected to use there are for doing precisely
a chisel, and a wood plane.
Absolutely.
But then also the satire is in Ruto is dishonest in blaming the tools, because he knows that it's not
the tools are for the tools to function, they need someone to handle them. To handle them.
Exactly.
And who's been handling them?
The proxies. This is a Cold War, and the proxies are getting
But my question is, what is going on after curfew? You know, is there some scheming that happens? You know, 6:59, 7 o'clock.
You see, that's
it
a good.
strikes.
We should ask that question with the same question. With the question, where is Uhuru Kenyatta? You see, a man who's remained quiet for over 2 weeks now must be doing something during the lockdown period.
So when we are locked in our house, there are people tiptoeing
around Nairobi
and congregating to scheme.
Absolutely, you know, maybe Raila Odinga, and who I think we have seen going against curfew. I mean, going against the lockdown, going to Kajiado. Is possibly making ways to State House. Maybe David Murathe comes out of State House at 6 a.m.
And you know what? If I was in their position, I would probably do the exact same thing. Never waste a disaster. Just don't.
Precisely.
So we'll see what will come out of those clandestine sessions.
Absolutely.
What does Gado have in the Standard?
Gado has a drawing of coronavirus Mythbuster. And these are the fallacies that have been there with regard to corona. So first one is 5G mobile networks do not spread COVID. Next is exposing yourself to the sun or to temperature higher than 25 degrees does not prevent corona from getting you. Third is you can recover from COVID, you can recover from COVID-19. Catching the new coronavirus does not mean you'll have it for life. Fourth is being able to hold your breath for 10 seconds or more without coughing or feeling discomfort does not mean you are free from COVID-19 or any other lung disease. Fifth, wow, this is exasperating. Drinking alcohol does not protect you against COVID-19 and can be dangerous. That is nonsense. The new coronavirus can be transmitted with hot and humid climate.
I think here we can allow for a comic strip because it's actually educative.
Yes,
educational.
This is so important
and informative. It's debunking myths, and Gado is probably going to save lives from it.
Absolutely.
But it's actually lifted from the WHO website.
Yeah, and if there's one box I'd want to point out is the one on the alcohol being able to cure corona. And I think most people have now seen.
Tuam's friend Sonko was telling us that we can just take some shots.
Some Hennessy. Some Hennessy shots.
So misguided.
Good
of
one.
course.
Good one, Sonko. Good one, absolutely.
And in the Star.
In the Star, you have caricature of the Donald himself, Donald Trump, with a mask on his eyes. Second is the WHO, is he Secretary General? What is he?
Director General.
Director General. And his mask is on his ear. And the third is the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And his mask is on his mouth as well, it should be. And but
it should also be over his nose, and it's not.
Absolutely, and it's also not. And the caption there is new outbreak COVID-101, conspiracy theory disease. I think Donald Trump today has slapped the WHO with a $500 million funding cut. Is that correct?
He's withdrawn all funds to the WHO.
Yes.
But then also I think what the cartoon is making reference to is Trump pointing fingers at China as the cause for the disease. So I think it goes back
and also
to
alluding to him being blind, being blind to the corona reality.
If anything, this cartoon reminds me of the case that was brought against China in front of the ICC by a company called, or an organization called Freedom Watch Inc.
Yes.
So they promote the freedom in the US and in the world. Very vague mandate, good for them. But I think they're trying to say that this is biotech warfare and whatnot.
And I really don't trust the Chinese on this one. Just a couple of days after they signed the trade deal with the United States, January 16th, 15th there. January 26th is when the Wuhan Health Commission announced that human beings can catch corona from that Wuhan market of theirs. So I see a lot of mischief from the Chinese here.
Very true. Yep. All right. And on that note?
On that note, I think, what do you think?
I would go with Dula's cartoon.
I'd go with Dula. I'd go with Dula.
It's fantastic. It's layered.
Dula, hands down, gives us the winning cartoon.
Absolutely.
What is our final thought?
And now our final thought, it is inspired by the Roaring 20s. And 2J will tell us what the Roaring 20s is.
Yes, the Roaring 20s. So this was a decade of very exciting social changes. It refers to the decade of the 1920s in Western society and Western culture. It was a period of economic prosperity with a distinctive cultural focus in the United States and Europe. And it does actually overlap with what we discussed yesterday, the Harlem Renaissance. So for many Americans, there was the growth of cities and the rise of consumer culture and the upsurge of mass entertainment. You have radios, movies, just huge things coming together. And the so-called revolution of morals and manners, which represented a liberation from the restrictions of the country's Victorian past. And the US was at the heart of it all. So the Roaring Twenties was a dramatic social and political change period. For the first time, more Americans lived in cities and in farms, and I think that's true for most of the global north. And the nation's total wealth more than doubled between 1920 to 1929. And this economic growth swept away many Americans from this poor lifestyle they used to have to this affluent but very unfamiliar consumer society. So I think what I'll do is just highlight some of the causes that led to this Roaring 20 period. So the first thing is government policies. The Republican presidents during the 1920s were pro-business. This is known as laissez-faire policies, and they were aimed at helping the economy. They lowered taxes, which meant that businesses had more money to invest, but it also meant that people had more money in their pockets to spend on consumer goods. The government also put tariffs on imported goods so that American products would be bought by consumers. And then one new thing that happened that Americans hadn't experienced before was this high availability of credit. And we end up seeing this being a precursor to the Great Depression of the 1930s. The second thing is the 1918 influenza and the end of World War I.
Correct.
So many people forget that the 1918 influenza happened just before the beginning of the Roaring Twenties. And we forget what impact this could have possibly had on the beginning of the Roaring Twenties and what role it played. The third thing is the 19th Amendment in the United States. So large numbers of women were recruited to take on jobs that the men had vacated as they went into the war. And so by the time the war ended, it was impossible to tell women to go back into the house and to be mothers and to be housewives because they had made such great strides in helping the economy at that time. So after years, they were finally given the right to vote, and that was under the 19th Amendment of the Constitution. The fourth thing is technology and mass production. During the 1920s, Americans had extra money to spend. And so they spent it on a lot of consumer goods like ready-to-wear clothes, home appliances, washing machines, toasters, and in particular radios. So productivity rose dramatically because all the industries adopted Henry Ford's model of the assembly line technique. And so you have these new industries like aviation, chemicals, electronics. These grew the access to products, but it also grew access to jobs. So in the US, you see annual production of vehicles tripled. And by the end of 1929, half of all American households owned a car. But the most important consumer product was, as I was saying, the car. There were low prices, it was accessible with credit. I think at that time a car cost $260, which for now was actually quite cheap. And the dollar replaced the pound sterling as the preferred currency for trade. And by the end of the decade, America was producing 85% of the world's cars. And 40% of overall manufactured goods came from the United States. But like Charles Dickens says, it was the best of times and it was actually also the worst of times. And all good things do have to come to an end. And only 9 years later, in 1929, the Wall Street, you have the Wall Street crash and the beginning of the Great Depression. So you really see how in just one decade, you have this huge, influx of inspiration and then at the same time, this downward spiral.
As you rightly said, Tujay, this glorious period of economic boom and general happiness was actually preceded by a virus, a pandemic. That's what I was looking for. A pandemic that affected 500 million globally, and 5 million died. And historians have noted that there's a clear pattern that happens right after a pandemic, or right after an epidemic, like the Black Plague. And like the influenza, the Spanish influenza in this case. So historians are seeing a seesaw where people seesaw from isolation and then when it's over, they go into a form of mega socialization once again. And this sees a rebirth in consumerism. This may not be necessarily true in all spaces because this kind of, when we're hit by an epidemic or a pandemic, it also hits our pockets. People lose their jobs and whatnot because we take a beating. However, people then become very nihilistic after that, and they start prioritizing things like entertainment and general debauchery. So people then also get into debt rather. So I don't know if we're going to come out of this COVID pandemic into the roaring 2020s where people start practicing like mega socialization. Or also there's something that we need to think about, which is a depression that is not necessarily monetary or an economic depression, but one that is actually physical and mental, because this is such an age of traumatization. So I don't know if which of these patterns we will fall into.
No, I mean, absolutely great. And I like the part you spoke about consumerism. But I also want to say this. You see, there will be a difference largely in what happened in 1920s, in the 20s, and what is happening now because of COVID. And you see, in the run-up to the Great Depression, the main reason for it was because of the massive boom. I mean, speak of janitors, the Wall Street traders, bankers, anybody who did trade. All their savings, they put it on Wall Street. And you know, when, as you rightly say, it's because the Wall Street crashed, and that is what actually caused the Great Depression. Now, are we in a situation right now we have a boom? Absolutely not. The global economy had been experiencing very moderate growth. It is not the consumerism that we saw in the 1920s. And as you know, if you went to economic class, the stage after a boom is a bust. Now, what we saw in the 1920s was a bust. But then again, why we may not even see what happened in the 20s is largely is how government responded. You see, in the 1920s, governments were largely in the era of classical economics. They believed that for you to treat a recession or a depression, you raise your taxes, you use your savings, and then you cut government spending. But what we actually saw is the entry of a man called John Maynard Keynes, who is the father of Keynesian economics. And the thesis here was, if you raise aggregate demand, cut taxes, cut interest rates, give stimulus package, is how you revive the economy. So largely, governments are likely to behave very differently from how they behaved in the 1920s. But thirdly, and most importantly, for 1920s to happen, and for the same thing to happen now, it will be different, because the way the human being moved factors of production or means and mediums of exchange like money is very different. Right now, if 2J is selling pizza and I need pizza, I just give her a call and I send her money through M-Pesa. Before then, I needed to move that money. I needed to go myself and pick that pizza up. Technology has changed a lot of things. The mediums of exchange, how we talk, how we relate. We can all work from home because we have the internet. Before, if I needed to send a parcel to Mombasa, I needed to send a messenger and to send the post office.
But you still do have to remember that this is grounded in your privilege, right? So you are able. Very few people in Kenya, in Nairobi, are able to afford the privilege to work from home.
I agree.
Right? And a lot of the struggles...
to order pizza.
I agree.
A lot of the struggles coming out of informal settlements are people saying, how can I... social distancing is hard in the quarters that I live in. Or I cannot afford to social distance because I have to get food for my family.
I agree.
But of course, I do agree that the interconnectedness of the global economy has made it appear that we may deal with this differently than they did in the 1920s.
I mean, when you have 85% of this country controlling the informal economy of this country, then it tells you the size. What I'm talking about is privilege. Many of our people wake up every single day to go and heat sufurias, go and cook chapatis, and they actually they rely on movement of themselves, and therefore, I mean, yes, you're right. A lot of it.
There are very many variables to
account for.
Yeah, absolutely.
On a day where we had a winning headline from The Star, and the Daily Nation gave us a winning cartoon from Dula. So yesterday's quarantine riddle was, people always buy me to eat, but they never eat me. What was the answer, Tujay?
It was a plate.
What did people say?
We had cutlery, which I suppose is also quite true. I think most people did get the answer correct or along the right lines.
People are either very clever or they're using Google.
Could be a table, right?
To eat, you can do other things on a table, like have a meeting. Today's quarantine riddle, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, is this. A thief enters a shop and threatens the clerk, forcing him to open the safe. The clerk says, the code for the safe is different every day, and if you hurt me, you'll never get the code. But the thief manages to guess the code on his own. How did he do it? Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're also on your TV screens, on GoTV, Pang Free to Air, and Star Times. Have a good evening and see you tomorrow.
Yes.